In the history of video games, the early 2000s was an interesting time, as a new generation of consoles were released one after another. It started off with the PlayStation 2 in March 2000, followed by Nintendo's GameCube in September the next year. Then Microsoft entered the arena a few months later and released the Xbox. The de facto standard format of survival horror games up until then has been fixed camera angles, as represented by Resident Evil 0, which came out in 2002, and the jump in graphics quality compared to its predecessors was a sign of things to come. So when Cold Fear came out more than 2 years later, its use of predetermined camera positions combined with third person and over-the-shoulder perspective should have been a groundbreaking innovation that propelled the genre forward. Except Resident Evil 4 came out a few months earlier and set the standard, not to mention being a smash hit. As far as I can tell, this game remained in the shadow of what it's compared to, often cited as an underrated title that Resident Evil fans should check out. And today we're going to do exactly that. Cold Fear is developed by Darkworks, the team behind Alone in the Dark: The New Nightmare, a challenging but excellent survival horror from 2001 that has great atmosphere and story. What sets this apart from their previous project and other similar games is brought about by the unique setting. As far as I know, there has never been a horror game set on a ship while in the middle of a storm before, and that allowed them to come up with some unique gameplay elements. First of are the environmental hazards, like violent waves crashing on the side of the ship, as well as suspended cargo and pulley systems that can slam into our character if we're not careful. Since the vessel is swaying side to side, the developers also picked a spot on deck where we could get thrown off if we walked past it at a bad time. But more importantly, this gave way to a unique challenge to the combat, as our weapon crosshair would sway against the movement of the vessel. This is combined with the fact that undead enemies can only be defeated if we land headshots or stomp on them while they're down. It's an interesting set of features that add to the overall tension, and even though the ship only represents the first 1/3 of the game, most of these mechanics are used throughout. While the setting has brought on mostly fresh ideas, the same thing cannot be said about the narrative, which follows a popular theme in the horror genre back then. We have a military that discovered an alien life form, which they thought could be used as a weapon, and started experimenting with it until things got out of control. Our protagonist, Tom Hansen, who got caught up in the mess, tries to put a stop to it, coaxed on by his sense of duty and curiosity.
You're a Coast Guard and her dad needs a rescue. Go rescue him.
That's Cold Fear's story outline, and there's nothing remarkable about it. If we put everything what we've described so far together, one might think that we're looking at a survival horror game, but it's not. Some of the essential elements for what makes up that genre are missing, which I'll talk about in a bit. For now, let's set our attention to the first thing that stood out, which is the usage of mixed camera placements. When traversing the environments, we get a combination of moving cameras locked in certain angles, along with third-person view. And every time we aim our weapon, the camera switches to over the shoulder. On the surface, it seems like a fantastic idea that brings together the classic with the modern, but in practice it's quite disorienting. In a lot of interior spaces, the camera would be pointed somewhere opposite where our character is facing, so as we aim down and switch to his perspective, that immediate jump of visual information without a connecting pattern is disorienting, and can be a problem to players susceptible to motion sickness. It also means that enemies and hazards off screen can get the jump on us, which happened a lot in my case. This decision regarding camera placement seems like a missed opportunity as well, because if during its development they thought that permanently latching a camera towards the back of the protagonist was a good idea, They could have easily done so because everything in the game that lies off screen are properly modeled and textured. So, I'm curious to know what led them to make such a peculiar choice. However, this issue is only minor in comparison to its other quirk: no in-game map. What you'll be doing in Cold Fear is summarized as going to one place to retrieve something that would open up another area and advance the story, while fighting monsters along the way. Obviously, a game which involves a lot of backtracking like this would benefit from a map, so I can't think of any good reason why this game doesn't have that, especially when most of the other titles which came before it did, including the aforementioned Alone in the Dark. This problem is amplified by the saving system, which is only triggered as we pass through certain doors that move the story forward. It may not be a big issue on the ship, which is fairly easy to memorize, but once we get to the other area, it does. So if Hansen perishes while looking for the next door that would trigger a save, nothing could be done about it. He has a skill which allows him to translate words written on doors, but without a map, it's pointless. If I had to guess, I would say Darkworks intentionally omitted that feature as a way to slow players down, because if we knew where to go as objectives are updated, we could probably finish the entire game in one session. Apart from these issues, the other one I encountered is with specific cutscenes. In some of them, Tom will get attacked by monsters while it's still rolling. Thankfully, all of them can be skipped if necessary. Now, you might be wondering, why is the progression so fast? Well, that boils down to two missing features. First, there are no puzzles to solve in this game. Second is the lack of any item management because there's no inventory and storage box. Essential supplies like medkits and ammo can be retrieved from enemy remains and are used on the spot. There are certain rooms dedicated to them, but there's really no need for it, as the items in question are quite abundant. This is the reason why I think Cold Fear should be classified as an action horror, topped off by the fact that the encounter music is quite energetic, which resembles something that you'd typically hear in a fighting game. Gameplay-wise, the combat mechanics is solid. Apart from what's mentioned earlier, Tom has a melee attack that will push enemies away, giving us time to go for a headshot. Several weapons do become available as we progress. I just find it amusing that when our characters switch in between them, there's no animation. There's also a resistance meter, which is basically a stamina bar that slowly drains as our character runs. The only point to this is that we must always have a bit left, so that when Hansen falls off a ledge, he still has energy to pull himself back up. With regards to enemies, just as expected, human foes are easy to get rid of, unlike the undead ones which are formidable but fair. Most of them will attack with a melee weapon, but some can use rifles, which is hilarious. I can't say the same for the small tentacled creatures though. Once they latch on, the damage they can do per second is tremendous, and this is at normal difficulty. They're easy to eliminate but are agile and somewhat sneaky, so I recommend turning off the music so we can hear them approach. In my opinion, the best part of the game is on the ship, and unfortunately, as I've said earlier, is only 1/3 of it. The remaining 2/3 is on a facility type of environment, which has its interesting moments, like the boss fights and scripted sequences, but for the most part is made up of what you come to expect. If there's a reason to play this game in 2023 and beyond, it's because of the combat, which is consistently fun and will immediately feel familiar to fans of the genre. Assuming you can handle all of the negatives I mentioned, then just go in with a mindset that you'll be playing an action horror game, and you should be good to go.